I want to do what my passion is, which is to write and tell stories. And so I went to Northwestern for my master's degree, and then years later, I got my PhD in religious studies. I study now the intersection between narratives and religion. Narrative is story. It's a story. I mean, one of the first things we do when we're kids, we learn through stories. They can get into the human heart where no lecture can go. Narrative construction requires two things: the actual narrative and its repetition over and over again. Like for Palestine is what? Palestine is a land without people for a people without land. How did that become accepted? Through repetition. It's about time people in the Arab world and Muslim world at large take control of their narrative. They should not be defined by what others think of them.
Hi, I'm Lafan and welcome to another episode of Ajyal Show Season 2. Stories shape the way that we see the world. Narratives consume us, they bring truths to our world. Today we're going to explore how these ideas are really created, how they're repeated, and how we ultimately come to accept them as these truths. Our guest today is an accomplished journalist, editor, and university at Northwestern University. With a career spanning from magazine writing to academic research, his work focuses on how media shapes our understanding of the world. As a Palestinian American, his research dives deep into how narratives have been used to undermine the Palestinian cause and how the rise of social media has disrupted these long-standing stereotypes. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Ibrahim Abusharif to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
We're honored to have you. How are you?
Good. I'm doing
Feeling
fine.
comfortable?
It's my first time here. Yeah, I'm really comfortable.
Okay,
Happy.
yeah.
You guys are great.
I'm glad. So I wanted to kind of start from the beginning. I wanted to ask you, how did you get into this fascination or passion with narratives?
Well, I was born and raised in Chicago area. And of course, I grew up, like many Arab Americans do, sort of trying to figure out what your identity is. And part of the identity crisis that many Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans deal with is living with the stereotype about them that they don't really know when they're children. And so when they grow up and they start saying, why do you believe these certain things about us, about the Arabs, about Muslims, and the like? And it's always about the stories that they learn, storytelling, journalistic or commercial or entertainment. So narratives absolutely inform how we understand the world and how the world understands us. And the powerful narrative storytellers are sort of exterior to our experience. So it's about time, and this is my advocacy, that people in the Arab world and the Muslim world at large take control of their narrative. They should not be defined by what others think of them. So I didn't put it in those words when I was younger. I didn't have that kind of vocabulary. But I did understand that implicitly that this is an issue. And so in high school, I started writing short stories. I saved them, but I never showed them to anybody. And then my parents insisted that I study the sciences. Arab parents, they want their kids to become doctors or engineers. So I got undergraduate degrees in the sciences. And then I later on, like 4 years after I graduated, I decided I want to do what my passion is, which is to write and tell stories. And so I went to Northwestern for my master's degree, and then years later, I got my PhD in religious studies. And I study now the intersection between narratives and religion.
And then how did you move from, writing those short stories that you wouldn't show to anyone to eventually getting to a point where you actually want to teach people about narratives?
Yeah, it's an interesting background. I remember I went to Lebanon, and I went to the refugee camps that suffered from the massacre, the Istishhad massacre. And when I went there and I spoke to the people of the camps, and they told stories that are completely absent from the narrative of the massacres in the United States and North America. And this really helped me understand that, these things are not going to be fixed passively. So I decided that I want to build the skills. I want to develop the skills to help people understand things in a fuller, more comprehensive way. And so I applied to Northwestern, the Medill School of Journalism. I got in, thank God. And what drove me to do that was to learn the skills to tell stories that are underappreciated.
Right. So learning the skills to tell the stories are underappreciated. Now, as someone who's going to be hearing these stories, what are some of the things that we need to understand about framing and how people make stories and frame particular narratives in certain ways?
It's a really good question, because framing is the everything of stereotype construction. How journalism uses words, how they use words like terrorism and extremism and radicalism that are reserved for an ethnic or a racial category, and whether they're Arabs, Muslims, or in the past it was Latinos and the like. And so the words that are being used are there help influence how a story is being told. And these are called framing terminologies. It's in journalism, and people and consumers, they read these words, they're being impacted by it, but they don't know why. And so the words that we use to report on or tell stories of other people is everything. And so I think we need to have the skills to understand, what are these words? Why is terrorism only for people of color? Why is crime always associated with African Americans and the like? So terminologies and framing is very important. So I've always preached to my students, build your vocabulary. It's not an egg-headed, schoolmaster thing. Build your vocabulary, and your capacity to build stories will increase dramatically.
And when we're thinking of these framing terminologies, why is it important for us to be very critical about the types of words that are being used?
Yeah, I mean, words are the basic unit of meaning making. I mean, we understand right now what we're doing is we're throwing words at each other, right? But we understand them. And we all can detect that are words from people who are angry, people who are happy. These are the words that we understand that subtly carry the mood of a person or the understanding of a person or the ignorance of a person. It really depends on the words that they use. And so I studied framing terminologies, in my graduate programs when I was learning how does journalism work. It does work. And so we have to really dissect it and try to figure out why are Western stereotypes so it's all over the world. How does that happen? And so America is a cultural hegemon. It is, it is ideas that are produced by the elite, and it's distributed throughout the world, and it's generally accepted because America is great and all that. And it has some benefits, but I think right now, especially after what's going on now in Gaza, the Western hegemonic control of media narratives has been destabilized. People lost a lot of respect internationally for American news, because we all know that it's a genocide. People are afraid of using the word genocide. We all know the ideology that's pushing this, but everyone's afraid of using these words. And so I think right now, the silver lining in this terrible act of violence is that the global narrative stream has been penetrated. It's no longer owned by one civilization.
Since we're on the topic of framing, I want to kind of take an example from what's
you really
happening
like
in
that
Gaza.
topic.
Yeah. So for me, when I look at the news,
Yeah.
or not even just the news, but social media,
Yeah.
one of the things that really bothers me is how it always has to start with one question that I've heard a billion times now. Do you condemn October 7th?
Oh, yeah.
So if I was to ask you to kind of break that down,
October?
like why would the West want this question to be repeated so much?
All right. Well, ask me that question, and I'll answer it, and you'll
Okay. Do you condemn October 7th?
I condemn the question.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why I condemn the question. It's not that I delight in civilian lives being lost. I don't. But the question is a loyalty test. It's the handshake to get into a conversation that everybody should refuse. I mean, that's why it's usually the first thing that people are asked, do you condemn October 7th? And if you say no, then you're an extremist. And you say yes, then you compromise. And I think the question itself needs to be condemned and needs to be taken out of the conversation. And another reason why it should be condemned, it's usually asked for people of a certain race. You don't see people asking white experts, do you condemn October 7th? You don't. You see it asked to Arabs, people of color. This is why the question in itself is inherently problematic, because it is racialized, and also it is a loyalty test. As a storyteller, I I don't have a secret handshake, and I don't want one. I'm going to tell a story as it is. And that's why the question needs to be condemned altogether.
Yeah. So you said that with Gaza in particular, like one of the silver linings is that maybe we're kind of destabilizing this, Western narrative that's been pushed. But what do you think has been kind of the reason as to why it's been different to, let's say, quote unquote, all the other times?
Well, I think because of social media. I think people, if you have eyes and you have ears, you listen. We're seeing the violence, we're seeing the damage, we're seeing children being killed, women being killed, and the elderly. All the vulnerable communities have suffered the most. And so you, in the past, if you're away from those images, you don't have access, then you're going to be more willing to accept the dominant narratives. And so if you see these things on social media, you immediately know there's a problem with the narrative. And so this is why people are moving away from it. CNN, BBC, MSNBC, Fox News, Sky News, all these organizations have been shamed because of their slanted coverage of Gaza. And I think more people have a problem with this than those who are willing to admit it, because of the political stigma of saying these things. And then if you say it, then you're anti this, you're anti that. No, I think that the discourse needs to be expanded. And finally, I think the region has figured that out. Because everyone's trying to chase America. And if you're or the West, if you're in the posture of chasing other people, you'll never catch up, because it's a constant chasing. Stop, do your own thing, get the skills, learn, and tell your own stories.
Now, that's, let's say, us taking kind of like a modern day example, which is kind of like looking at the framing of Gaza. But like when we look at the origins of framing, like what is the purpose of framing something? What has been...
Yeah, framing actually in itself is not evil. It's not problematic, because we all do this. We all operate from some kind of frame. What framing does is offer context, so you don't have to repeat what is already known in conversations like our conversation. I mean, I know that this is it's an interview, and you don't have to keep telling me it's an interview. You're framing it. You framed it once that this is what we're doing here, and so you don't have to repeat it. So we understand the context. In Gaza, we understand the context in different ways. We're forgetting that the situation in Gaza did not start October 7th. And so we have to break that framing, because it's not. It started 75 years ago, and many historians say it started 100 years ago. And so the current framing right now is an attempt to make people believe that it started October 7th. And we're living in a time where people are intellectually lazy. They just want other people to think for them, and they want other people to decide for them. But I think this is why we have to propagate the idea that you have to learn these skills, because if you learn the skills, it's not, I know how to tell the story, I know how to write a story, I know how to tell and make a documentary. Okay, that's not just that. But you learn how the sausage is made, you learn like under the hood of the car, how the car runs. If you don't have the skills, you'll never learn that.
And how do you think that we can help improve kind of this idea of, you said people might be intellectually lazy these days. Mm-hmm. Like, how do we improve that type of media literacy? And
if I'd be a very rich person if I had a magic pill that I can use to tell people, okay, now you're media literate. I think it's about patience. We need to be patient, but most of all, we need confidence. Because I think one of the aspects of powerful narratives is to believe that they're too powerful to be dismantled. And this is part of the narrative. And this is a myth. And so we think, how are we going to compete with the CNNs and the BBCs and the MSNBC and the Fox News? How are we going to compete? These are mega, huge corporations. How are we going to compete with that? That question is part of the narrative. It's not part of the reality, because I think the truth has a power. One nugget of truth will destroy 1,000 lies. So we have to just have the confidence, stick to the truth, do fact-finding. I don't care whose feelings are hurt, and tell the story. So, we have to understand. We need confidence. Our young people need to have confidence. I think they're overwhelmed by oftentimes by, American cultural imports, and that even the comedies and the like, that sort of implicitly tells students, hey, listen, in the West, this is how things are done, and they're successful. Therefore, their politics must be successful, and I think that needs to be challenged.
Do you think there's something that people can do, let's say, on a daily basis, where they can kind of build that level of confidence to be able to, or whether it be daily or like just frequently?
Yeah, it's a good question. But it goes back to reading. I think people are having a hard time reading. I read the literature in education journals, and I see everyone's around the world. They're complaining that students are not reading anymore. But reading you have to read. You have to read. There is no other way. There is no other way. And so if you read, you not only are you learning things in a more complex way, in a way that has more depth, but you're building your capacity to think. And so I think we need confidence by having confidence in how we think. I mean, there's a crisis of thinking. And so I would begin by asking students, asking young people, or everybody, to start reading a little bit more, and then a little bit more, then a little bit more. I don't care what it is, just read. Because social media, you can just get on the on Instagram. This happens to me. It happens to everyone. And then I turn ahead. 2 hours have passed, and I'm looking at what? The cats, and I like cat videos. I have to confess.
Me too.
I like cat videos and people falling down. All these people getting scared. We all like those kind of videos. But honestly, I think what they do is they produce a certain kind of intellectual laziness. And we just want other people to think for us, and can't do that. You can't get ahead if you're waiting for someone else to think for you.
So we were talking like earlier about particular stereotypes, like that are, for example, attributed to, like, let's say, African Americans when it comes to crime. My question to you is, where do these stereotypes come from?
It's deliberate. I mean, this isn't something that naturally pops up. In the slave era of enslavement, there are many newspapers and articles and stories and produced that showed African Americans as being lazy, crime-ridden, lustful, and that kind of thing. So that was deliberate. And so it goes back to what we were talking previously about Orientalism. Same thing with the Arab world. Arab have these three things. They're lazy. They love Western women, and they're into money and into material things and the like. But those stereotypes are not. They're purposive, meaning they're meant to be produced. And so Orientalists, before a European power can colonize another world, they have to produce narratives about those people that says we need to civilize them because they're X, Y, or Z. So it justifies what is basically land theft, resource theft, but we're doing it in the name of civilizing people. So these narratives are important because they come before whatever happens in the world. Nothing happens in the world. Nothing happens in the world before the narrative is produced. Then everything follows. Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, right? We're told that it's a big threat in the world, right? And so then America bombs the hell out of them and commits what I think is a genocide. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died based on the narrative that this is a dangerous country. And it turned out that they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, but those narratives are meant to either enslave people or to occupy people.
So do you think the kind of shaping of these type of narratives are fueled by political ideology?
Absolutely. Absolutely. By major political ideologies. For example, Native Americans. I don't mean to bring everything back to America, but Native Americans were claimed to be, savages, and they have no civilization. They're uneducated, and their religion is weird, and all these kind of things that are produced about Native Americans. And basically, what we saw in America is a genocide. One of the biggest genocides in human history, destruction of the Native Americans. However, the narrative produced about it made it seem like it was necessary. This is how powerful stories are. It's not just really, let's tell a story and sing songs. No, stories influence what people can do to another people, what it permits. So we're talking about something that is no joke. You build a narrative and you really confront narratives because I think it's a confrontation for what's happening in the world. And just one more thing about ignorance. Ignorance is not simply what you don't know, it's what you're not allowed to know. And there's a word that's used in academia. It's called agnotology. It's the study of ignorance. How do we not know what we don't know? So in Gaza, we don't know why they're there. We don't know, the relationship between the governing body of Hamas and the civilians. They're intertwined. No one knows that. And people are not permitted to know that. They're not permitted to know about the Nakba, this catastrophe. And so decontextualizing that requires framing.
And how do you think kind of something like Orientalism is used in Gaza, let's say, to kind of dehumanize the Palestinian cause? Because like if we think of it logically, let's take the labels away where you have, a bunch of people who used to live somewhere, then someone came to live there and they told them they're not allowed to be back. And It makes sense. But then how does this idea of this framing of it and the Orientalism behind it, how does that make us reach a point where it's justified now?
It takes time because Orientalism, in terms of producing narratives about people you want to conquer, has been around for centuries, to be honest with you. And so, but it really sort of flowered into an art when the colonizers went to other places because, you had to dehumanize the people you're colonizing. And for Gaza, it's part of the tradition of dehumanizing Arabs, dehumanizing a larger region. And so, I think when Palestinians are killed, children are killed, in the back of the mind, a lot of people who've accepted these narratives say, okay, they're not like our children. They're different children. We're sad, but it's not the same. Those categories of humanity, of our humanity, is a direct result of Orientalist ideologies that tell us that there are different categories of humanity, those who deserve peace and justice and support, and those who deserve death and displacement and massacre. That is not accidental. And so this is why I'm really, really up and high about teaching our students and teaching people in the region. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. And don't think it's impossible. Don't think it's impossible to push back on these narratives. It's possible.
So my question is, this is purely out of curiosity, right? Is that if we have kind of this idea that a lot of narratives can be shaped and created and they're fed to people, quote unquote, how do we kind of shine a light on this idea of having a potential discourse in a space where particular narratives are given more priority, let's say, over others?
Yeah, that is a complex question, but it's sort of at the pulse, to be honest with you. It's an important question. How do you do that? One of them is to stop chasing the narrative makers of the other side of the world. Start producing your own and start distributing your narratives. And it used to be everybody wants to convince the West and the people of the West about we're humans, we're humans, we're humans. I think the more you say we're human, you're almost admitting your lack of humanity, because that shouldn't be a requirement for people to say we're human. How did that become a requirement? By saying, Palestinians, we're human, how can they treat us like this? I understand the complaint, but the solution is stop doing that and really go out and produce your own civilization, your own humanity, your own arts. I believe in the arts, your own creativity, your own spaces for this. And if you do that, then the discourses of the West have to follow. They have to pay attention. They have to, because that's the nature of conversations. If yours become loud enough and it's spreading throughout the world, people have to pay attention.
And do you think with the rise of social media that it's become kind of like a tool for us to kind of also spread our own narratives, not just maybe within our own communities, but also on a global scale?
I believe social media it's here. We live with it, and there's no doubt about it. It's a double-edged sword, because a triple-edged sword, because you have people who perpetuate negative narratives or stereotypes, and those who oppose them. But then you have these artificial intelligence bots these non-humans who are being programmed to very convincingly produce images and produce stories that are completely machine-made. So it's really, and also there's a lot of conspiracies, and conspiracies are, some of them may be true, but the problem with conspiracies is that once you start accepting them, you start believing that there are powerful people in the world who are invincible. They cannot be defeated, because this is what conspiracies do. Oh, they're doing this. They have a key to every room in the house. They got cameras everywhere you go. They got cameras in your fridge. We start believing all these things, and what happens is that we believe that we're doomed, because there are these superhuman beings who could do this. And if we believe that there are superhuman beings, then we're going to admit and surrender. But no, you can't push back. But social media has obviously good and bad sides to it, which is just about everything in humanity, but we have to pay attention to it. But in Gaza, it was instrumental in showing the violence, showing images.
I want to take it to the basics before I ask you this question afterwards, which is, if I was to ask you what makes a narrative, how would you answer that question?
Narrative is constructed, it's story. It's a story. I mean, one of the first things we do when we're kids, we learn through stories. We hear stories. So stories, they can get into the human heart where no lecture can go. And so this is what storytelling. So narrative basically is a way of storytelling, but in our context now, narrative construction requires two things: the actual narrative and its repetition over and over again. And multimodal, meaning it through written words, through podcasts, through visuals, and the like. And so it's the repetition. It's something that, in my own research, it's going to sound really wonkish, all right? And I'm sorry for it. But the epistemology of repetition, what this means is that things are accepted as truth for no higher reason except that they're repeated. And there's almost like a social technology about this, a social approach to manufacture this. So the narrative, it's a good question. It's the story, but it's the story repeated over and over and over again. Like for Palestine is what? Palestine is a land without people for a people without land. How did that become accepted? Through repetition. And I was looking at something today. You know, the Palestinians in pre-1948 Palestinians had a robust filmmaking. I wouldn't call it industry, but filmmaking process. And many of the films were confiscated and hidden because they showed a Palestine that completely was different than it being an empty land, people devoid of civilization, devoid of culture. And so it was important to have that erasure, how to erase a people's culture. So that's what narratives do. That's what they're made of. They're the stories, like people, a land without a people for a people without a land. Somebody makes that up, or they're very clever with words. But then it's not enough to say it once. A narrative cannot be said once and it's finished. No, it has to be repeated over and over again.
So, in a way, right, if something, as you said, gets repeated over and over again, we can possibly accept it as true. So, in the space of narratives, let's just say, does then the truth become somewhat subjective? Or how do you really filter out what really is true? Because I'm sure if you go to one side of the world and you ask them a particular question that maybe has some aspect of opinion tied to it, it's hard to kind of separate the difference for, let's say, just an average person consuming narratives on a daily basis. So how do you filter out the truth in narratives?
If I knew the answer to that, I have ideas about that, because it's an appropriate question. It's a big one. But I think one of the things that we're living in a time that's very strange, and one of them is the very status of truth is shaky. I mean, the whole status, the whole apparatus of what is truth has been destabilized. And so, I mean, how do you make everyone in the world accept certain truths? Is go to the fundamental and make them few. Number one, innocent lives should be preserved no matter what. You pound that. You pound that. And that innocent lives, there are innocent lives. The cultures of the people need to be respected. The claims of the people need to be respected. I wrote an article recently, a popular article, about Joe Biden and the attempt to create a positive and flowering legacy. It's an attempt to sort of colonize the future because we want to remember him in a certain way. But his legacy is doomed because it will always be associated with genocide. And so, in terms of having trying to convince the people, narrow it down to 4 or 5 things that is universal. The lives of people, the Palestinian right to define their own narratives has been resisted. And this is why if you go to CNN, all these places, most of the guests are not Arabs, they're not Palestinians. And so there's an attempt to deny Palestinians the right to be knowers of their own context. And so how to deal with that is to keep it down to 4 or 5 principles. People have rights. If the right of prosperity and safety is right for one people, it's right for everybody. Death, well-being, and murder is wrong for everybody. Well-being is right for everybody. And I think that has a larger appeal.
One of the prominent narratives that I feel like, at least personally, I can say I assign to Palestinian people is this narrative of resistance. Because there's always, it's just what you've seen always, whether it be through Bisan, her holding her camera, showing you day to day, even if it's Ahad al-Tamimi, raising her fist How powerful do you think these narratives are? One, that we have them like from first person in some way. And then 2, how important is it that we have also journalists that are like international journalists who also have the right to kind of come and cover those type of things? Because I think one of the prominent things that's also been raised during Gaza at the moment is this lack of international journalists being able to enter Gaza.
Yeah. Well, getting to the journalists, I think what we're seeing right now is the worst case of what they call witness tampering. You kill the witnesses. You don't like the message, you kill the messengers. And what's highly problematic about this is the journalistic world has not said much about this. In the West, we're up for freedom. We want transparency. We want it except for the Palestinians. It's almost like there's an exception there. I think it is important, but it has to be. I think international journalists, there's something called embedded journalism where you go with the military and then observe, but you observe only what they want you to observe. I think there's a courage deficit for journalists, Western journalists, to get in and for them to report without filters. And that would be valuable. But I don't think that the management or the hierarchy of the news organization will accept their reports. They especially in terms of the major stations, the major media news, news outlets. But you have other news outlets. You have TRT, who is doing a really good report. Al Jazeera, of course, is completely outdoing the Western news sources, wiping out Western sources. And you have these up and coming Global South places like Middle East Eye, Middle East Monitor, and the New Arab, New Line magazines, the National newspaper, and their prominence has increased. Somebody at Al Jazeera told me that since Gaza started, viewership of Al Jazeera skyrocketed. Oh. This is a good sign because I think people are really fed up. So Western journalists going in is valuable. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
And, when you think of something like, this is on a very generic plane. Yeah. When you think of something like university, you've grown up your whole life thinking, I need to go to university. Or, if you look at the news when you're young, the news, I got to listen into the news. But what do you have to say about potential or existing ignorance that exists within these organizations?
Yeah, well, there are couple of ways of combating that. One of them is you make your own press within the United States context, for example, and try to make sure that flourishes, but you need the skills. You need the skills. If you don't have the skills, you're never going to do your own storytelling. And so you need the skills and you go off that path. The other, go off the mainstream path and truly sort of reach people in a different way, indirect way. The other way is for young people who are from marginalized communities to get into the mainstream media, climb, get the skills, build gravitas, and then influence the newsroom, influence how even the hierarchy thinks about the world in a different way. So you need marginalized communities with their own storytellers getting into mainstream, and you also need marginalized community to produce their own media. And so those are the two main ways.
And how do you think, how important do you think it is for journalists? I mean, given that you have been one yourself as well, I don't know, maybe are still, is how important do you think it is for journalists to ensure that they try and learn about the context in which they are trying to cover? And how do you really get to a point where like, okay, I think I'm there, I have all the angles?
Yeah. Well, in journalism, the bread and butter of journalistic storytelling are your sources. I mean, if you are writing about Gaza, you better have the right sources. And so something called performative both-sidism. Basically, okay, we talked to them, let's get a token other guy so we can say we did both sides. But of course, it's token, and it has to happen from within, and it's not going to be there. We can't wait for the elite of journalism organizations to wake up one day, hey, boy, we're really bad about the Middle East. We're terrible about. No, it has to come from within. And as I mentioned, you do need marginalized people, marginalized voices in the newsroom to impact it. Like in MSNBC, you have Ayman Muhyiddin, who I think he was at Al Jazeera, then he went to MSNBC, and I think he's doing really well. But he's a lone guy, but I think he is influencing.
So I want to take it back to Orientalism for a bit.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to define the term, for lack of a better word, but because I feel like a lot of people might have heard it, they hear Orientalism, but what, if you were to give me like a simple definition of what Orientalism is, how would you define it?
Orientalism is a process of producing knowledge meant to understand the people and subjugate them. This is the root of it. It's knowledge production, producing knowledge, producing narratives for the sole purpose of conquering a people, of colonizing a people. It's a very simple, almost irresponsibly simple, but that is in essence what Edward Said is trying to say, is that, we're looking at these systems of higher education. They really want to know their scholarship about Arabs and Muslims, and they study Arabic, and they really sort of study society. He's saying there's some good scholarship out there, and I agree with him. There's some good scholarship produced by Orientalist scholars, but for the most part, the purpose is to subjugate a people. Get knowledge to try to subjugate a people. That's the problem of Orientalism. This is what Edward Said is trying to point out.
And
did that work for you?
100%, I think super clear.
Okay.
I studied Orientalism before, and one of the interesting things about it that I found is that, your first line of thought is to think, demonizing is probably the easiest way to kind of subjugate a people. But
Absolutely.
There was another aspect of it that was quite interesting, which was the idea of like romanticization of a people also in a way to subjugate them. So I'd love to hear like how maybe we kind of experience these things through them.
Yeah, that's the other, you're right. They demonize the people, but they exoticize them, and they say, these people are passionate, they got belly dancers, the whole thing. And basically what they're trying to do, either say that they're demonized, that's one stream. The other stream is that it's unusual. You don't see art and stories of, Arabs and Muslims in Cairo and other places going to school, building hospitals, having universities that are older than any other university in the world. And then you don't see that. What they want to show you are the belly dancers, the violence, and that kind of selective cherry picking of what's going on in these societies. And so what happens is, and this is really a spot on question, really good question, because how are these narratives produced and how are they supported, Orientalist narratives? They're really supported often by artists. You see the art of, some of them are really well-drawn art, and of eunuchs and of concubines and all these kind of things. They're saying, this is the Arab world. But the art supports that narrative. You don't have to know how to read. You don't have to know anything. You don't need any critical thinking. Here's this magnificent piece of art. It must be true. Because people are unable to separate the way something looks from what it's saying. If it's beautiful, therefore what they're saying is beautiful. This is highly problematic. It's a problematic way of looking at art. And so Edward Said has another book called The Culture of Imperialism, a really important book where he picks apart key authors who tell stories of life in India for a British person, and basically the people, the natives, are in the background, proposed on purpose. The main action and the main plot involves these white people, English people doing the stuff. And in the background, you got the Indians who are your servants, who are your opponents, never people who are at all equal with that. So that the arts support these narratives, and we have to pay attention to what the arts, even today, we're seeing word songs and they're supporting certain themes.
We live in a world, I think, that's very globalized in the sense that we're consuming Western media at a rate that I think has not been matched to previous times. So how do you avoid, I've been in a room with all Arab people, and I swear to you, I heard someone say, it's a bit too Arab, or, something along those lines. So how do you avoid that, in a way, self-orientalism? How do you avoid getting there?
Okay, I grew up with my feet in two different worlds. I mean, I was, born in Chicago, lived in Chicago area later. And so for me, I just saw that identity construction, making identity, is very important to that question. And there is something called double consciousness. Double consciousness is when a people who are subject to stereotypes start believing those stereotypes about themselves. They start believing that they're violent. They start believing that they're inferior, and then start acting out in a way that supports that stereotype. It's a really subtle thing. And so you also have Orientalism, in the Gulf. You have it at other places where, on one hand, they're pursuing a system of economic development that's clearly borrowed from the West. But then they want to have the token, architectural designs that are, Eastern, Islamic, and the like. And so there, you have this sort of conflicted understanding of identity. But double consciousness is what we need to pay attention to, because a subjected people, marginalized people, start believing what people are saying about them, and they act it out. And I think this is what happens to marginalized communities in the United States.
And how do you, what is our sword and shield to the stereotypes that we are consuming?
Just be sure of your identity. Work it out. Work out your identity. I mean, think about it, talk about it, read. Speak to people you trust, people who love you, and people you love, and just really trust them. And so you have to work out your identity, and it takes time. It's a process. For me, if I can get personal, can I?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, really? You want me to? Or I'll get personal here.
I'd love if you can share something.
Well, for me, the identity I finally settled on, and it took a while, is my religious identity, because it's unassociated with the movements of the world and what's going on. I mean, do you believe in God? Do you worship God? Are you learning about God? And that kind of thing. I think that for me, that was finally something I settled on, was my spiritual identity. That spiritual identity can withstand attacks of identity everywhere. And so I had this discussion in my classroom the other day. I asked the students, what are your identities? It's okay to have multiple identities. We're not talking about multiple personalities, schizophrenia. We're not talking about that. Yeah, well, we're in Doha. We are Northwestern students. We're not Georgetown students. We are whatever they are. There's economic identities, status, all these things, even branding, what kind of bag you wear or you carry with you. Because we talked about if you carry a Coach bag or a bag from Kmart. I don't know if you guys know Kmart or Costco, whatever it may be. So basically we have an identity to brands. We go to that restaurant, we drink that coffee, it's all associated. But those identities, it's not a problem to have them. I'm not suggesting that at all. Otherwise, life would be extremely boring. But know that your core identity is the identity you have that cannot be attacked or taken away from you. Your agency is intact. That's the strength that we have to, take root in. The strength of that identity, the permanent identity that doesn't change. Yeah.
Well, I'm just a bit mind blown.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I feel like I'm Oprah Winfrey right now. Dr. Phil. Yeah. But it was my personal question and my personal answer, and I'm not at all scaling it, meaning everyone should have my experience. No, I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to be personalized here.
I think it's interesting because, like, if I was to take it back a notch, right, I would think about this idea of, like, the concept of what I define as identity is probably also shaped by narratives that I'm consuming.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, as like a Palestinian person, identity is a very interesting one.
Yeah.
Because, like, the way that identity has been framed is, possibly relating to a country, and this is or your passport, or that's how it's been framed. So how do you also kind of navigate this,
It's
these wide questions that also to some degree have also been framed?
Yeah, they are. Well, again, best way for me to answer this is I was a consumer of Western entertainment, and I think we forget how powerful entertainment is in our identity. For example, I grew up listening to, Western music. I mean, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Chicago, the Beatles, of course, Rolling Stones. So I grew up with that. And so, we were talking again. I started to keep bringing it back to my classroom, but we were talking about the role of music in identity construction. And so, I think the arts play a big role here. I'm not saying if I'm still a Beatles fan. If because I like the Beatles does not mean I'm less Palestinian than others. As long as that core value and that core identity is settled, then everything else is okay. Like, for example, what's this Palestinian song that's been banned?
Is it
Palestinian,
Dami Falastini?
Dami Falastini, yeah. That's been banned, and some, I think the Israelis don't want, I don't remember exactly.
I think, yeah.
I mean, but it's an attempt to not just, occupy you, but occupy your mind, your taste. And that's the big deal, if you ask me. I don't want to preach, but you just got to watch what's occupying you. You have to watch what you're letting in. And so, so the identity markers are many. Music is one of them. Entertainment is, in the bigger framing, it's not just about politics. I mean, if we're watching, Friends, you watch Friends?
Yeah.
Okay. You're familiar with all the characters?
Yeah, I
you
just don't
Seinfeld?
like Ross.
Huh? Ross?
I just don't like Ross.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he's a Northwestern graduate.
Oh, really?
I feel like ripping out my diploma. No, but he's a Northwestern grad. But however, we all look at that, but and it's funny, right? It's humorous, and we laugh, and laughing in a way is showing your acceptance of the premise of the show, because we get the show, we get the jokes. And so, but is this your identity in terms of understanding how courtship happens, how different things happen? And so I think it's important to separate the entertainment value from the moral value. But I watch American shows. I watch, this is going to be broadcast. The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Breaking Bad. Yeah. Breaking Bad is probably the best television on earth. And it was awesome. So many of these things, but I don't let it control me. So I think a lot of young people have to get that strength. Right. You have to be careful what's occupying you.
So you said that, or at least when I think of, like, let's say, for example, occupation. Mm-hmm. When you think of an occupation of a land, it's easy for you to tell whether a land is being occupied because, it's a physical manifestation of that occupation. But this concept that you brought up, which is kind of that occupying information or occupying narratives. Yeah. What are our telltale signs to know whether our narratives are being occupied?
Well, one main sign is that they're overly simplistic, and the problem, but they're accepted. So if you really believe that some lives are more important than other lives, you have accepted that narrative, and of course, it leads to serious damage and bombing and killing. But I think the larger damage is occupying our minds, and when we start believing in ourselves, and I think we do. I think many people in the region have accepted that Arab life is less important than other lives. It's subtle. You can hardly, but you do see it. But in terms of occupying the minds, I think the most occupied people in the world are Zionist Jews. They're highly occupied. And I'm not saying this. I'll tell you who's saying this. Religious Jews are saying this. They're saying that Zionism has occupied the thinking of the world Jewry, even their own sense of religion. And so I think this is what we have to look at very carefully. So occupation is a broad thing, but I think intellectual occupation, occupying even the sense of future, even occupying the past, what you try to do is distort history. This is an occupation.
Yeah. Well, if you were to give a practical piece of advice, so something that once someone listens to this podcast, they're like, okay, I'm going to go do this to like kind of help increase their media literacy, or any resources that you would suggest, what would those be?
Yeah. Live with your eyes open. Live with your eyes open. Be perceptive, and just try to move away from being passive consumers of media, because right now it's impossible to escape mediation. It's everywhere. But try to get to the point where you're not just a passive consumer of media, but you can analyze it. You start noticing signs. You start taking it apart. You interrogate it. And that's an important thing to do. It's highly conceptual, what I just said. I know that. But at least think about what you're consuming. Just think about it. Doesn't hurt. I've never seen people die from thinking. I can check the medical journals about this, but I think that, no. Just think about it and take courses and online courses, or go to school, come to my class, whatever it is. You need to sort of build your skills, because if you build your skills to become a storyteller, you know how they're made. And so when you get stories, you can say, no, something's up with that. So that's where media literacy happens.
I'm actually quite interested in the idea of a passive audience, because I feel like for the most part, if you ask the general population about how passive they think the audiences are, they tell you they're very passive. And if I feel like, in my eyes, I feel like that's quite a pessimistic way to kind of look at it, because it makes me sad to believe that. So my question to you regarding audiences in general is, do they actually have the potential to not be so passive? Are people actually not as passive as we?
Yeah. I mean, this is going to sound like a contradiction, but producing a passive audience is a result of a very active campaign to do so. So passivism doesn't mean that, this is the way I was born. No, it's a product. It's a product. But once you show people that you're a product of a certain campaign to be passive, I think change can happen. We all want to be better. We all want to be different. And I'm not saying that, we can't have silly time. We all get in silly land once in a while. We just want to enjoy stuff. We don't want to overthink it. And I think don't be afraid of that. Don't let anybody occupy your happiness. Don't let anybody occupy your sense of happiness, and just hanging out with family, hanging out with friends. Never feel guilty about that, no matter what's going on in the world. So don't let anything or anyone occupy your sense of happiness and blogging. What I am suggesting is that you at least think about what you're receiving, what you're reacting to. And the way to do that, to build the muscles, I go back to one of your first questions, start reading deep. When you weight lift, you build strength by lifting more than what you can normally bear. Same thing with reading. This sounds preachy, but it really works.
No, I believe you.
Yeah.
Then
I sound like an Instagram thing. Okay, let me look in here. Let's go to the next
No.
preachy thing. All right, this guy's nuts. All right.
So I remember like one of the first things you said was about the fact that you were writing like these short stories and at the very beginning. And my question to you is, how do we encourage this generation, hopefully the coming generations, to embark on this journey of wanting to tell their own narratives, and how do they amplify it?
Well, I think this starts at home. It starts with education, obviously, but I think this this heavy emphasis. You got to become an engineer. You got to become a doctor. And you want to study journalism? That's crazy. That's not prestigious enough. Oh, you want to become a storyteller? You want to write a novel? Don't do that. That's what the silly people do. No, this is problematic. This is, I think the intellect is built and preserved through creativity. Creativity isn't just, coloring things and making them look nice or sounding nice. Creativity is an important part of our identity makeup. It's an important part of how we react to things. So one way to do it is to encourage students to get into the arts, get into writing, get into filmmaking, get into it. Not everything has to be sort of the rational sciences. We have to study sciences. We have to study law. Even law is frowned upon. We have to study medicine and engineering. I've seen parents introduce their kids. They're so proud. He's my engineer. I want you to meet my engineer, who happens to be my son. It's that kind of thing. I don't blame them for being proud of accomplishment. But if you really want to climb out of a certain narrative hole, you've got to teach people how to tell stories and encourage them. Do not make them feel silly. Because this is the worst thing you can do, is make a young person feel silly for pursuing what they want. This is a terrible, terrible issue.
Wow. Ibrahim, this is the first time I've had a conversation about the media and the narratives in the news, and actually have felt like at the end of it that I feel a very large sense of optimism.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you first and foremost for that.
And
it's been really an honor having this conversation, and you've really, I think, given so much insight to people listening who have maybe been subject to narratives that they're not in control of, and to kind of give them that power to shout from the rooftops about what they believe is their truth.
And shout proudly and with confidence. And I'm honored, and I'm glad, I'm really honored by the invitation to come here. I just hope I didn't get too preachy in there, because I get that way.
The narrative becomes true when you repeat it, isn't it?
Yeah, good one. Good one. So I'm going to keep repeating it. A good one. All right.
So thank you so much. Thank you.